That is what greed led to where we are today.
No. Greed on the part of the banks. Right. Materialism on the part of the Americans.
It's not quite that simple. I want to add a dimension here because you're talking about regulation.
Yeah.
All right. It is time for the Congress, Republicans and Democrats, to stop encouraging, exhorting, and forcing banks to make low-income loans with no documentation. Right. Stop that. Right. The Community Reinvestment Act, which was passed in the mid-90s, which was extended in the early 2000s, literally pushed these lenders to make low-income loans and package them.
Okay. You cannot blame this on low-income people that are getting a house.
I'm not
This is about a lot of people that wanted to go and buy $500,000 homes in Florida, Arizona, California. Come on, Larry.
Subprime, substandard loans was a creature of the U.S. Congress in the 90s and the 2000s.
But that's you saying poor people have caused this crisis?
No, I didn't say, listen to what I'm saying. Not poor people. Members of Congress who were rich people. But their liberal guilt consciences forced banks and lenders to make lousy substandard loans, and that has to be repealed.
Okay, let me rephrase.
Not everybody can afford a home, Joe. Some people have to rent. That's just the way it is.
They should be told that.
Thank you, Mika. Thank you.
The banks should not be saying we can work this out. We can.
And you can't do this razzle-dazzle packaging of a lousy loan where I make the loan, I sell it to you, you sell it to Fannie Mae, and Fannie Mae sells it to the Singapore with sovereign wealth fund. That has just got to stop.
Well, isn't that the larger problem? Isn't that the larger problem? The fact that banks, which are highly regulated, they can only go along with, I make $12 an hour. I wouldn't buy a $500,000 home. The banks,
say no.
But the banks can say no. But they said, well, okay, we'll go along with it because they could sell the mortgage to someone who's not regulated the way they are.
No, the Fannie Freddie model is completely broken down. That's going to change, but. In Washington, they have to stop what they've been doing. They've been saying to these banks and to Countrywide, Angela Mozilla, if you don't make low-income loans in certain neighborhoods that used to be, quote, red line, we will deny your branches, we will deny your expansive balance sheet. That's got to be completely off that.
You got to go. But what percentage of our crisis are these low-income loans? That's my point.
Are you kidding? Subprime is the big problem here, Joe. Subprime was the problem. And people made mistakes up and down the line. Stop subprime. We got to put some money down. When you buy a house, you put nothing down to buy your home. That's what they were doing. Yep. What happened to the days when we had to put
a lot of rich people were doing that.
That's right.
All of it has to stop. All of it has to stop. And then we can get back to some basic blocking and tackling on home buying.
Do you know the percentage of poor people, no money down for a home? Are they more responsible for it, or are people with the second and third homes speculating?
There you go. You know what? There were speculators, absolutely. But at the end of the day, when you look in the banks, AIG, Merrill Lynch, Bear Stearns, the ones that failed, it was substandard, subprime lending.
This is going to look like a James Brown concert soon.
Should I escort him off?
Oh, yeah, get the cape.
Escort
him off.
People should not give up hope on America, though, Joe. Let me make that point.
I'm told you have to leave, sir. Sir, we have to ask you to leave. We're really sorry, but you're going to have to leave.
Mike is give me the hook.
Come on, I'll give you a hug.
Well, one of the groups at the center of this financial crisis is a so-called community activist group known as ACORN. In point of fact, ACORN is a left-wing special interest group now under investigation for embezzlement, voter fraud, and providing mortgages to illegal aliens, among other things. The group, ACORN, lobbied Congress for years to allow more of those risky mortgages that in part led to this crisis. And now ACORN stands to reap hundreds of millions of dollars from a government bailout of Wall Street. Lisa Sylvester has our report.
ACORN, the Association of Community Organizations for Reform Now, rallied in front of the Miami Federal Reserve Bank. The group is pointing fingers at Wall Street for causing the financial meltdown. But critics say this community activist group shares the blame.
They've always lobbied Congress to do everything they could to make more and more, or force banks to make more and more loans to low and moderate income people, which is a very noble sounding goal. But unfortunately, they have contributed to the financial ruination of thousands of low income families.
It goes back to something known as the Community Reinvestment Act that passed in 1977. The law ordered banks to make loans to low and moderate income people. The Consumer Rights League says Acorn stepped in and used that law to pressure banks to lend to subprime borrowers, even those who couldn't demonstrate the capability to pay back the loan.
Back in the early 90s, they would stage protest at banks that, they sued them for redlining. They were engaged in legal action.
Enter deregulation in the 90s. Then Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac began purchasing these mortgages and selling them to private investors. And the subprime market took off. Former Clinton administration official Franklin Raines, who ran Fannie Mae, amassed $90 million in 6 years he ran Fannie. Home ownership was up, which pleased groups like Acorn, and Wall Street made a ton of money until home prices started falling. But Acorn says it's not to blame. It's all about greed.
When you look at all the bad subprime loans that were made in the last 5 years, 3 out of 4 of them were made by institutions that are not governed by the CRA. So there's no way you can blame the CRA on 75% of the subprime loans that were made in the last 5 years.
And Acorn, which calls itself the nation's largest grassroots organization of low and moderate income families, has come under fire for other issues. At least 5 states have opened investigations into its voter registration drives, and Acorn employees have been convicted of voter fraud. Still, this group, as you mentioned, stood to benefit from the bailout deal, and part of any profit realized from the sale of troubled assets were to go into a fund, and that money would be distributed to low-income housing advocacy groups, including Acorn, Lou.
Now, and think about this. In the midst of this, everyone talking about a clean bill and the Democratic leadership, let's be clear. This is a straightforward deal for Acorn and other groups, left-wing groups, set up by the Democratic leadership of Congress. They're not interested in the bailout per se. They want to spread this out. And as many people believe that this bailout in part is dear to the Democratic leadership because they want to advance a social agenda here as much as an economic bailout of Wall Street.
Yeah, Lou, in fact, what they did is in a prior legislation, they actually created these 2 funds. And now essentially what they were going to do is try to use this bailout to fund and put money in those funds in order to benefit groups like Acorn and in order to advance some of their causes, as you mentioned, including their voter registration drives, Lou.
This is pitiful. And the fact that, of course, this Congress is fully supportive of this nonsense is all the more disgusting. So voters right now, all of us as citizens, have a lot to be disgusted with on Capitol Hill. Thank you very much, Lisa. Lisa Sylvester reporting.
Americans have a pretty short memory. So when we see something dramatic happen like yesterday's record drop in the Dow, we tend to blame, oh, yeah, I think it's his fault. But the real story is that the seeds of almost every crisis we face, from the Cuban Missile Crisis to the gas shortages in the Southeast that are happening right now, to this financial crisis, these seeds were planted a long, long time ago. Let me read you a few highlights from a New York Times article to prove my point. Quote, in a move that could help increase home ownership rates among minorities and low-income consumers, the Fannie Mae Corporation is easing the credit requirements on loans that it will purchase from banks and other lenders. The action will encourage those banks to extend home mortgages to individuals whose credit is generally not good enough to qualify for conventional loans. Fannie Mae, the nation's biggest underwriter of home mortgages, has been under increasing pressure from the administration to expand mortgage loans among low and moderate income people. In addition, banks, thrift institutions, and mortgage companies have been pressing Fannie Mae to help them make more loans to these so-called subprime borrowers. In moving even tentatively into this new area of lending, Fannie Mae is taking on significantly more risk, which may not pose any difficulties during the flush economic times, but the government-subsidized corporation may run into trouble in an economic downturn, prompting a government rescue similar to that of the savings and loan industry in the 1980s. So you know that article was published exactly 9 years ago today, September 30th, 1999. The administration that was pressuring Fannie Mae, the Clinton administration.